if you care about the place you're in and it cares about you, then it seems natural to try and think in its terms. What could make this place healthier and happier? And management has to support that.
We often think of strategic thinking as something that only trailblazing CEOs and visionaries are capable of. This misconception creates all sorts of problems as strategy remains a topic for organizational elites and stays separated from the work that needs to be done. Now, what is strategic thinking and how could we reconceptualize it as something that many organizational members contribute to? Welcome to the Dell podcast. This week we have a very special conversation in store for you. I sat down with my dear colleague, the great Henry Mintzberg, a professor here at the Desautels Faculty of Management. If you're unfamiliar with Henry's work, he's one of the great management thinkers of our time and we're honored to have him on. My name is Saku Mantere, I'm the editor-in-chief of Dell and I'll be your host today. Okay, I'm joined today by Henry Mintzberg, the famous management academic. He's changed the way that we think about strategic management, organization design, the MBA, and later also more broader societal issues such as balancing between the private and public sectors and so on. Well, Henry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Saku. Always delight.
So let's start with your basic idea of strategic thinking.
The trouble with strategic planning is it tends, like many techniques, to become a kind of knee-jerk exercise. And I'm not sure people necessarily step back and see the broader picture and think about the broader picture. So often strategic planning just reduces to a numbers game where the output is a lot of targets without much strategy and without thinking about the whole notion of strategy.
How would you characterize an organization that can think strategically?
They're open to ideas that come up that are quite unusual, which is similar to any perceptive person, although entrepreneurs in particular are often perceptive. They'll see something and say, wow, what an opportunity that nobody else sees. So, I always go back to the IKEA story about how did IKEA end up selling unassembled furniture. And the reason they did was because a worker, it turns out it wasn't quite a worker, it was somebody doing a project for them who had to get a table in his car and it didn't fit, so he took the legs off. And then came the strategic moment, and this is really critical, if you want, about strategic moments. The strategic moment was, hey, wait a minute, if we have to do it, so do our customers. And that's the realization that there's a whole unbelievable market or potentially for unassembled furniture. And then the second aspect of it, you could call a strategic culture in a way. I never used that term before, but why not now? You could think about a strategic culture that's open to this idea getting to the place where somebody could do something about it.
So in your book, The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning, you talk a lot about programming, which is associated with strategic planning. It is that top management of an organization comes up with a strategy and then they create programs for organizational staff members to then implement those strategies. And this seems somewhat antithetical to strategic thinking in the organization.
Yeah, well, to me, strategic planning often becomes strategic programming. In other words, they don't really think about or come up with new strategies. They come up with ways to program the strategy they already have or extend it, or sometimes to copy somebody else's strategy. So if you look at the phone companies today, or the cell phone companies or the banks, so often they're not coming up with creative strategies. They're pursuing the strategies they had with minor changes in positions, particular markets, or they're doing what other banks that are competitive are doing just to catch up with them. And so what we call strategic planning ends up as strategic programming. What are the consequences of a given strategy or an existing strategy, rather than what should our strategy be?
Yeah, and I suppose if a company is running a strategic program, it's unlikely that anybody comes up with the idea to take the legs off the table because, they're preoccupied with the targets and metrics that have been given to them already that they need to fill out. So, people don't think differently.
Precisely. You've got to be down by the guy with the table or be the guy with the table to come up with this idea. How many IKEA workers took the legs off tables and never thought twice about it? But one time, somebody said, hey, wait a minute, they have to do it too. And that became a huge strategic opportunity. Not always, but very often. Sitting in an office is the worst place to get a strategy. You got to be out seeing what people are doing and say, hey, wait a minute, nobody did that before.
The organizations, they're kind of funny because people often don't think when they're at work. So they're almost like incentivized not to think very freely.
It's an interesting way to put it. They're incentivized not to think. Yeah, they're incentivized not to think laterally. They're incentivized to do what's expected and do it well. And lateral thinking is not encouraged of all kinds, whether it's strategy or anything else. Just get the job done. And too many managers are, look, don't bother me with all this silliness, and we don't need playfulness. We don't need kooky ideas. We just need to get our work done. If you're in a machine kind of organization, a machine-like organization, the object is efficiency, to do it as well as you possibly can. Yeah, so workers might come up with a little variation of that to save a few bucks in the production, could be welcomed, although that's Kaizen and it's not that popular in all organizations.
Often organizations tend to be run by logics of appropriateness, where people are focused on what am I allowed to do, or what will look good if I do X or Y. And it seems that the notion of strategic programming is actually pretty close to that idea, that you're actually giving a logic of appropriateness to people so that they wouldn't think laterally, as you said.
Yeah, fit is an obsession with conventional organizations. Everything has to fit in its place, be in the right place, at the right time, and so on and so forth, which is fine once everything's established. But if you need to come up with something new because your old markets are failing or your competitors are beating you or something, then you've got to go beyond fit. You've got to create fit. And existing fit doesn't necessarily explain some new possible fit. In fact, anything that's new is likely to be initially conceived as misfit because it doesn't fit. Why haven't we been doing that all the time? Why should we be doing that? Take the legs off the table. What's the problem?
So I think we've all had the experience of, in the typical queue of an airline, you're making a complaint or trying to change your ticket in an airline. You often meet with a customer representative who gives you the rules that this is what I'm allowed to do. I'm sorry, sir, this is what I'm allowed to do. So it seems that also this programming response, it has a lot to do with an attitude that's very uncaring.
Yeah, I mean, if you do something different, like laterally, then you're punished. You're outside your sphere of authority. Whereas in effective organizations, they will reward people who did something different because it really helped to serve a customer. I distinguish between customer service and serving customers. Customer service is with a capital C and a capital S, and it means a greeter standing at the door being paid to smile at you. Serving customers means somebody's got a problem and a worker walks by and says, oh, I don't usually do this, but they're having some trouble, let me help them.
So care and strategic thinking have something in common.
Yes, if you care about the company and you care about the customer, it could be the source of the thinking, because if you care about the customers, how can we serve them more and better? And you care about the company, how can we make this company more effective? Then it's a kind of caring, yeah.
So I realized that sort of your classical work on strategic planning, strategic thinking, it actually relates to a lot of the very contemporary issues that we see about organizations being uncaring. Even though we might not talk about strategic planning as much as we used to, there's still a lot of programming that happens in organizations. And we see, say, you worked a lot with healthcare. We both done work in healthcare. And we see that there are healthcare organizations that really don't necessarily care that much about their clients.
In healthcare, I would put it a bit differently. I think people go into healthcare in large numbers or large proportions because they do care. But our governments and our insurance companies in the States do so much micromanaging of the professionals that they cease to care, or they find it difficult to care. I'm working on an article talking about the National Health Service of England, among others, where they're constantly reorganizing. The British Management Journal has referred in a editorial, I guess, years ago, to the NHS being in a constant state of disreorganization. They're constantly reorganizing to no avail, and reorganization becomes an excuse for thinking. When I lecture on this, I show a chart, an organization chart with no words on it, no names, just an organization chart. And then I say, now I'm going to show you it's called an organization. And now I'm going to show you a reorganization, and I repeat the same chart. Because a reorganization is changing a lot of names and a lot of names and titles and pretending you've reorganized. It's very popular because it's very easy. It's just a big paper exercise. But is that a reorganization, or is that just a copying out of much more fundamental different things about combining departments, breaking up departments? That's reorganization.
Yeah, and if we return to the topic of care specifically, I suppose if you're reorganizing, is what you're doing really driven by serving your customers better, or is it being more effective in actually changing the world that you would like it to change, or is it just a matter of changing the chart? So those are two very different things.
Well, there's another dimension to this too, which is most organizations are dumped on people. You don't get into a great discussion about reorganization. You get told that you've got a new boss or new people reporting to you, or you've got a new title, and so on. That structures are learned, they're not planned, and people should have a chance to work out their own structures. And often they do. Within an organization, the structure defines all the silos. The people figure out how they can get across the silos to work with each other. And once they've worked out how to do that, maybe you need to change the silos in accordance with how they've worked things out.
What is it, in your view, that allows people in organizations to care about the outcomes of what they do?
Well, let's start with the assumption that most people want to care. It's a lot nicer to go to work and care about what you're doing and care about the success of your institution. And it's easier to do that if it cares about you. If you're sitting on the edge of your chair thinking, well, they just laid off everybody around me, when do I get laid off? How can you care?
I think it's fascinating what you just said, that let's start with the assumption that most people actually care. Most workers actually care or want to care. And going back to what you said about the NHS, in public administration, when we do these reorganizations, often actually the driver seems to be that there's this deep mistrust about public service. That sort of, if we don't constantly survey and change public institutions, they're going to underperform. And we have to make them more efficient by constantly changing them, because, their staff will get lazy and sort of that seems to run very much counter to the idea that most of the staff actually would like to care if given the chance.
Yeah, I mean, especially in healthcare, but in all kinds of fields. You want to read a wonderful description of a worker who cares. Studs Terkel did a book years ago. Do you know it? It's a brilliant book called Working. It's about 40 or more stories of people describing their work. And one woman is a checkout clerk in a supermarket. And she talks, it's wonderful. She talks so proudly about how she's got this. First of all, she knows the price of everything in those days. In those days, you didn't have the automatic thing. She knows the price of everything, was so proud of it. She talks about the dance she does where she hits her hip with one thing to do one thing. And it's wonderful to read about someone who loves what they do. It's terrific. But, a lot of this getting more efficient is getting less proficient. The more efficient you make healthcare, often the less proficient, because anybody can find ways to save money, cut down on the nurses, whatever it is. But it's proficiency that drives healthcare, not efficiency.
Based on this, how could we give a definition to strategic thinking? How just a working definition that would incorporate the notion of caring?
If you care about where you work, if you care about your colleagues, if you care about your situation, then you are likely to be more prone to notice opportunities that will benefit. After all, we do it personally. If you're having to get in a line to buy something and you see there's another line that's shorter, you care about yourself and your time and you change. There's an opportunity, you grab it. So people see laterally, in that case quite literally. So why not, if you care about the place you're in and it cares about you, then it seems natural to try and think in its terms. What could make this place healthier and happier? And management has to support that by setting up channels so that your ideas get through.
So one way to facilitate strategic thinking is to allow for at least some element of creativity.
I think there's two kinds of creativity. I think there's phenomenal creativity. So when I listen to Tchaikovsky's violin concerto, I'm just blown away. How did he come up with that? I can't even imagine. And Mozart even said the best part about writing a symphony is hearing it all at once. And then he said seeing it all at once. I can't imagine what that means. This is spectacular creativity, but it didn't change the world. Okay? Then there's ordinary creativity that changes the world. Like, well, if we have to take the legs off, so do they. That's creative in a minor way. That kind of creativity is I call a little switch. Okay, a little switch from us to them. And that's the kind of creativity that changes the world.
So it seems to me that one thing, it is the same forces at play that stifle creativity in organizations, that also stifle caring and strategic thinking as well. If we've defined strategic thinking as caring about the organization and its clients,
mm-hmm.
then it's the same types of mechanisms and attitudes and cultures that stifle creativity.
Absolutely. I think caring is at the heart of so much.
So what is the role of emotion as we strategize towards a better world?
Well, it comes back to change, doesn't it? That we need a kind of dramatic change that frankly is unprecedented. And right now our emotions go in exactly the wrong direction. A lot of populism is simply emotions gone awry, so that people are just expressing their anger and frustration and opting for choices that are clearly going to make things worse for them, let alone everybody else. And so you've got to have a shift of emotions to be able to care for the future state of the world.
So one thing that I think you've valued throughout your career is curiosity. But sort of how could we bring curiosity and, let's say, playfulness? Both of those are pretty complex emotions, but I suppose they're complex emotions.
Well, children are curious, and somehow we grow out of it. So the object is not that we're incapable of curiosity. It's been drummed out of us. But if you get punished for being curious or get punished for doing things that's out of the ordinary, then, how can you expect curiosity? But there are lots of people who are curious, and they tend to come up with the interesting ideas too.
So the thing about strategic planning, in particular when it turns into programming, there's not a great deal of space for curiosity or playfulness in that kind of an organization.
No, absolutely. It's the antithesis. The whole presumption is the antithesis of it. It's doing analysis and doing competitive analysis and studying all the statistics and so on. The statistics don't give you ideas. They can, if you're curious, they can be the source of ideas. But obsessing about the numbers does not give you ideas.
If you think about an healthcare organization, we think about, again, we go back to a healthcare organization that cares. If we think about caring for sustainability or social equality, why is it that we have so few openings for things like playfulness or curiosity or attitudes of that sort? And to me, it seems that actually playfulness and curiosity could actually be linked with strategic thinking.
I think you have to look to egomania. I think our societies are obsessively individualistic. And if you're always serving yourself, you may come up with ideas to serve yourself, but those ideas may at the same time do a disservice to the society in which you live. So everybody's running around, it's this economist, absolute abhorrent idea that if everybody makes out for themselves, everybody will be better off. And there's some truth in that, but there's an enormous amount of fallaciousness.
So the invisible hand in itself, will not get us out of this.
No, the invisible hand is slapping us down or digging our grave.
Okay. Well, with that happy note, Henry Mintzberg, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Yeah. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saku. Always a delight to get stimulated by your questions.
Thanks so much for listening. For more great conversations like this one, please consider revisiting some of our previous episodes. We interviewed some incredible thinkers and researchers from McGill University, and all our content is available to you for free. Delve is the thought leadership platform for the Desautels Faculty of Management of McGill University. This episode of the podcast was edited and mixed by Eric DeCare, and the music was composed by yours truly, Saku Mantere.